you, Fred. President Bush, Mrs. Bush, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's truly an honor and a privilege and really one of life's great moments to be here with you this evening at the President Bush Library for a number of reasons in particular that I want to share with you, which is I often like the very first current event is that they remember. And for me, it's this. I remember when I was 8 years old, my family gathered around the television, and we watched President Bush address the nation and talk about how we were going to be sending troops into Panama to help defend democracy against a brutal dictatorship. And after that, I remember Desert Storm. I remember my parents encouraging me to write letters in support of the troops. I remember the collapse of the Soviet Union. There's two things that I want to say about this. Mr. President, both of them are directed at you. The first is I want to thank you for providing my entire generation with a frame of reference for what a true leader looks like at precisely the moment in time where we were just getting old enough to understand what the world was looking like around us. And that's something that has stayed with me and my generation since then. The second thing that I want to say is for those of us that are part of a digital generation that had the opportunity to watch you preside over the fall of a physical Iron Curtain, we're doing our best to continue the work that you started by ensuring that as the world connects to the internet, we tear down the digital iron curtains that are popping up in autocratic countries around the world. Now, which I think brings me to my next quote, which is how I'm going to start this talk, which comes from an obscure American inventor who I'm sure nobody in this room has ever heard of. His name is Charles Kettering. He gets partial credit for inventing the air conditioner. And he once remarked that we should all be concerned about the future because we're going to have to spend the rest of our lives there. Now, I like this quote for a number of reasons. The first is, historically, every generation was lucky if they got to experience maybe 1, 2, 3 technological innovations that would produce seismic change in their lifetimes. Which meant that the future was reasonably predictable, but you also didn't have as many opportunities as an average citizen to help shape it. Now, if we look at the present and even in the future, every couple of years there's going to be new technological innovations. Which means that throughout our lives, no matter how old we are, the world is going to become much less predictable, and us as just average citizens are going to have more and more. So I spend a lot of my time traveling around the world, autocratic countries, unstable countries, trying to understand firsthand the ways in which technology is bettering the lives of individuals, complicating the lives of individuals, transforming relationships between people and their governments, creating uncertainty, creating new opportunities, and trying to make sense of all of it. And before I give you a handful of examples, I want to ask all of you a question. How many of you at some point in your life have sort of imagined life being extremely difficult to sort of continue without your mobile device? Be honest. How many of you find it difficult to sort of imagine going through the motions without your mobile devices? Good. By the way, you're not alone. Just so you know, 38% of Americans said that they would give up sex for an entire year before they would give up their mobile devices. And 42% said they would not wear shoes for somewhere between 5 to 10 years before they would give up their mobile devices. So again, you're not crazy. There's crazier people out there. So let me sort of probe a little bit more. How many of you would be late for a meeting with your boss by, say, just 5 minutes if you left your phone in the other room and needed to go back and get it? Be honest, how many of you? Okay, a lot of you. Now let me ask a different question. I'm from New York, so I sort of find the subway coming at me particularly terrifying. If you're in New York and you drop your mobile device in the subway and there's a subway coming straight at you, how many of you would jump onto the tracks to get your mobile device when there's sort of a decent chance you would get hit by the subway? By the way, there's always one or two, and we can talk afterwards. Okay, good. Nobody. This is a very smart crowd. I asked you that to go through that exercise because I want to tell you a story. I traveled to North Korea about 2 years ago. Very strange place. If you've ever seen the movie The Truman Show or a Broadway play, it's sort of a combination of the two. And what's amazing is North Korea is the least connected country on Earth, certainly the most totalitarian country on Earth. Do you know what the punishment is for being caught with a smuggled mobile device in North Korea? In some cases, you get the death penalty. So this notion of people literally risking life and limb to gain access to, by the way, not even a smartphone, but a basic feature phone, is actually quite real in some places. And yet I was surprised to learn more from dissidents than from actually being there that there's about 1 million smuggled mobile devices circulating throughout North Korea, which means there's an unbelievable number of North Koreans who are literally risking their lives to be able to gain access to even a little bit of connectivity. And then of those million mobile devices, a certain percentage of the people using them are then going to the, sort of up to the border with China to be able to get a signal so they can actually use it. And you talk to North Korean dissidents, and you ask them sort of why they do this, and they say it's all we've got. Before we had nothing, at least this gives us a chance to do something. And so every time you look at your mobile device, I want you to just sort of imagine that there are parts of the world where this device is so important and so meaningful that people will literally risk not just their lives, but the lives of family members to gain what little access it offers them. Now I want to take you to another place, Afghanistan, which Ambassador Crocker certainly will tell you, well, there's still no electricity, or there's no 3G signal, or there's no Wi-Fi access. Don't underestimate people, because there's a fundamental observation that I've made, which is people do more with less. And there's no greater driver of innovation than necessity. And the more impoverished and lacking in infrastructure a society is, the more likely they are to teach us how to use the devices that we think we understand. The same logic that leads a kid in the village that I'm talking about to basically collect a bunch of garbage and make a toy out of it, or when you give them an old pair of sneakers, they come back looking brand new, is the same logic they apply to a mobile device. I've never read the instructions manual to any mobile device I've ever had. You go to some of these troubled parts of the world, and it's amazing how innovatively they use these devices. So even if the hardware, even if the technology is still innovated and still built in the Silicon Valleys of the world, the ways in which we use it are going to come out of the developing world. Another story I want to tell you comes from Cuba, a place which is, as countries go from a minority of their population being online to their entire population being online, states are going to realize that as hard as it is to implement laws in the physical world, it's even more difficult to implement those laws in cyberspace, especially when cyberspace is the world's largest ungoverned space. So the natural reaction of states as they sort of try to avoid relinquishing control and power due to the societies coming online is they're going to balkanize the internet. So what do I mean by balkanize the internet? I literally mean filtering out content so that you're walking down the street, and maybe you have a little cough and you don't feel well. You reach into your pocket and you grab a smart pill. You then swallow that smart pill. It makes its way around your digestive system, collects some data on what's going on, some analytics, Wi-Fi's it to your phone. Your phone performs a simple algorithm that comes to some kind of conclusion about what may or may not be wrong with you, looks at your phone to see what availability you have in your calendar, what insurance you take, and schedules a doctor's appointment for you. Right? Sounds kind of crazy, right? Maybe even science fiction. Did you know that in the last year, there's a pill that does exactly this awaiting FDA approval? So we're living in a world now where the things that used to be seen as science fiction are now within our grasp and reality. And what's amazing is it's very difficult to predict what's going to technologically happen within a decade. And what that means is it's getting harder to predict science fiction than it is reality. It's actually difficult to think of things short of like going to Pluto that are going to just absolutely be impossible and are so sort of outside of the universe of likely. But you think about how low cost some of these things are, and you might say, well, how do you know the diagnosis? We're all sort of guilty of self-diagnosis from time to time. I mentioned this to actually somebody in the village that I told you about earlier, and they said, I would